power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
Everyone, it's Blue. Make sure you like and subscribe and go follow me on my Twitch where I live stream at least 3 times a week, and my Patreon where I have more content on there that I don't post here.
I think they had a meeting about it last night.
Why wasn't I told?
They sent you a card, but it said For Peter on it, so you must have thought it was from you, so you didn't, You know, it's just easier to call you stupid.
Today, I'm going to be watching Critical Drinker's video on the worst of 2024.
Now let's take a look at the worst. And wow, narrowing this one down to just 5 choices was a challenge all by itself, but there were a couple that I think we can all agree deserve to be there. First up has got to be Madam Web, a wannabe superhero movie in Sony's aborted Spider-Verse that was so hilariously terrible even the actors ended up taking the piss out of it. A decision that was almost certainly the best thing they could have possibly done for their careers. Featuring some of the worst dialogue, worst acting, worst directing and worst writing of any superhero movie ever. It was so bad that even the shill media couldn't possibly defend it. And ironically, the movie's spectacular failure and her ability to laugh at it somehow launched Sydney Sweeney into overnight mainstream success. I mean, I can think of a couple of other reasons too, but still, the film was so roundly mocked by everyone that it almost became something for us to bond over. Like, you almost couldn't even be angry at it because it was never going to be anything better.
When a movie actually does hit that good point of you are so bad, now it's good, because people watch it for being so horrible. I don't want to claim Twilight's in that category, especially someone who's never actually seen all of the movies. However, it seems it's coming back around where people enjoy watching it because they acknowledge that it's cringy or they acknowledge that it's bad. That could just be an opinion that I have from my experience from what I've seen and not actually true. And I'm not hating on anyone who likes movies since I haven't actually seen them myself. But that made me think of that idea, where there's a lot of movies out there that were actually aiming to be taken seriously and are good, but they did so horrible that they're only good because people like watching them because they're so bad.
But do you know what we did get angry over? Fuck Joker 2, a movie that I could best describe as anti-entertainment. A film made by people who actively hate the original movie and its protagonist, and by extension anyone who enjoyed either of those things. A tedious and plodding deconstruction of the first Joker, unbearably pretentious and weighed down by cringy and unnecessary musical sequences. It was a film that seemed to have been conceived and executed out of pure spite. Oh, so you thought Arthur Fleck might have been a slightly sympathetic anti-hero who had a reason for doing the things he did, eh?
Wait.
Well, you clearly didn't enjoy the film the way we deem acceptable, and you didn't take the correct messaging from it, so we're gonna punish you. Well, in the end, it turned out it was the studio who got punished, and Joker 2 ended up being one of the biggest critical and commercial disasters of the year. So you know what? F you, Warner Brothers.
His laugh. This is the one that I can't speak on as much because I didn't really hear as much about the Joker 2. I just didn't realize that it did so poorly. To say that it was made by people who essentially hated the first Joker is really just disappointing to hear. Also unfortunate because it can't really be blamed on Lady Gaga considering she hasn't, I don't believe, been in very many things. One of the only things that I know that she's been in, which was one of her first big acting roles, was in American Horror Story, and she won an award for it. So it can't really be blamed on her being in the movie or her acting as an issue.
Number 3, Borderlands. Let me pose you a question, dear viewer.
What?
Do you want to see a cartoonish, hyper-surreal first-person shooter turned into a confused mess of a movie with lame action sequences and a nonsensical story, starring a geriatric cast and a lead actress who's a quarter of a century too old for the character she's playing? Nah, me neither, which probably explains why Borderlands made just $33 million against a $120 million budget, losing the studio tens of millions of dollars and killing any prospect of future movies. Even though it was barely 100 minutes long, it was an absolute slog to get through, and I spent every single minute of it asking myself, why the f does this movie even exist? And to be honest, I still don't have an answer for you.
I believe people in the comments now might say something as to, how are you watching this if you haven't seen any of the movies that you're commenting on? I didn't even know that that movie existed. I've played Borderlands before, so Since it's been such a long time, I don't actually remember all the characters' names. However, that was why there was such a reaction, because I had no idea that they actually made a movie. And if I did know about it, I completely forgot because I never heard about it again. I did really love the video game. However, I have a terrible memory, and if it's been more than, well, 5 years, but even possibly 10 years since I played it, I'm not really going to remember much of it. Movies have actually always had a difficult time being made after video games, especially books. So that's already kind of starting off a bit rough. But with what's going on nowadays, where every character has to have some type of unique change to them, whether it's age or race or completely swapping their gender, whatever it may be, a lot of the characters' whole personalities are completely changed. And that can already make the movie that you might have an audience for because they're a fan of the book or video game do also poorly because you're changing it away from things that people are already fans of.
Number 4, The Crow. Possibly the most unanticipated and unwanted movie of the year, a joyless reboot of the Crow franchise that pretty much nailed it with the Brandon Lee movie back in the mid-90s and has been going downhill ever since. It was a film so grimly, tediously, unrelentingly shit that I felt like I lost all concept of time and space while I was watching it. Like when it was finally over and I emerged from the movie theatre into the sunlight, blinking and confused like a prisoner released from a 2-year stretch in solitary, I had to keep reminding myself that it was actually a real movie and not some weird fever dream. It was slow, bleak, depressing, boring and generally awful from start to finish, and a top contender for one of my least enjoyable movie experiences ever.
I'm assuming he's about to move on to another movie, so I'll just talk about The Crow. Can't really say much about that one either, because I've heard about it, but I know even less about that than the Borderlands, because I at least know about the video game. However, I kind of feel like it's not really necessary to look into since he described it probably really well. Again, another remake of a movie that was kind of unnecessary. Maybe you can say that it wasn't actually a remake, but everything's either a prequel, sequel, or a remake nowadays. Nothing's just its own story.
But of course, no trip to the 2024 Mount Everest of bullshit would be complete unless we reach the peak, the pinnacle of crap, the ultimate in terrible entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you The Acolyte.
Power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
I mean, what can I really say about this show that hasn't already been said by pretty much all of YouTube? It was a project conceived by people with no interest or understanding of Star Wars, no talent for writing or filmmaking, and whose only priorities could neatly be summed up in 3 small words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was a $250 million vanity project made by a woman who views entertainment as her own personal therapy session, and greenlit by a studio utterly determined to bulldoze its own franchises into the ground. And the backlash against it was so thermonuclear that Disney actually had to promise never to make anything more of it. Really, the only good thing I can say about The Acolyte is that it probably launched the careers of more online movie critics than The Last Jedi, and that in itself is a pretty impressive accomplishment. Now that's the worst of the year, but there's one more category I want to look at here.
A little difficult to say anything new about the entire Star Wars universe since I haven't seen any of it, and I would like to watch the movies eventually, maybe even react to them, but see them nonetheless, just because I do know that they came from something apparently really great because they have a lot of fans for a reason, and then maybe have just slowly gotten worse every time somebody touches it. Every time, like every show, every extra, what is it? Are they sequels? The extra 3 sequels? There's like 9 movies. I think the 3 originals, and then the 3 that came after that were kind of good. I mean, nothing like the originals, which is fair, but still good and watchable. But then the 3 after that shouldn't have been made. That's, I think, how I can remember how people have explained it to me. But then pretty much the shows have just also killed it. I think I remember hearing The Mandalorian was fine.
Now that's the worst of the year, but there's one more category I want to look at here, and that's my biggest disappointments of 2024. Not necessarily the worst films or TV shows ever made, but things that I had high hopes for that never quite lived up to expectations. And top of the list for me has got to be Gladiator II. Damn man, talk about a pointless sequel.
Oh, yeah.
It's a movie so preoccupied with venerating the original that it ends up just retelling the same story again, only worse. The acting, the characters, the writing, and the cinematography are all a massive downgrade from the original. It's bloated and self-important, the finale makes no sense, and if nothing else, it's proof that Ridley Scott's best days as a director are well behind him. It's a film that never should have been made by a director who shouldn't be making films, and it's one that I think everyone involved is going to end up regretting.
Their reaction almost being shocked that there was a Gladiator II, but it's actually what gave me the idea to watch Gladiator.
Are you not entertained?
Which, if you want to see, it's on Patreon.
Hell no, man. What the fuck?
Anyways, no, I completely remember that's what gave me the idea, and unfortunate to hear that it turned out pretty bad. Almost bad for the reason of not changing things that contradict the first story, but the fact that it's basically just a remake, so why would you call it Gladiator 2?
Now, House of the Dragon was one of the standout shows of 2022 for me,
No!
with an absolutely stellar cast and the kind of patient, smart, intricate plot that Game of Thrones used to be so good at. So I was pretty excited to tune in for Season 2 this year, and unfortunately, the more I saw of it, the less excited I became. Paddy Considine's King Viserys was the emotional glue that held Season 1 together, and without him, the show feels kind of directionless. Just a bunch of morally grey and increasingly unlikable people doing things to each other with no particular reason to root for anyone. Yeah, it's still well made, but the best way I can describe it is like looking at a really impressive but slightly soulless building. You can admire the technical skill that was involved in making it, but it doesn't really make you feel much of anything.
Wow.
By all accounts, the season had a troubled production history that was reflected in the rushed finale and an ending that just kind of stops on the verge of a major event. And I don't know, man, after this, I can't really imagine getting fired up for watching Season 3.
Might possibly overshare an opinion on this, but it's finally something that I actually watched. Not only watched, but reacted to. So it seems a little awkward to have this on my channel. And after each episode, I did have plenty of positive things to say, but as a whole, and once I finished and thought about it, there was actually a lot of complaints that I also had, which is basically what he already said, is there was just maybe a little bit of a higher expectation, not an unfair expectation saying it had to be as good as Game of Thrones was for most of their seasons, but a simple expectation for how good it seemed like it had potential for and how much it felt like it just flopped.
Number 3, Alien Romulus. Talk about failing to stick the landing, man. The trailer got us all pumped up for what looked like a return to form for the Alien franchise.
Ew.
And the competent direction, grounded production design and decent setup laid the foundations for what should have been a solid action horror movie. Instead, it soon devolved into cheap member berries and nostalgia baiting,
Member
recycling
berries.
ideas and dialogue from far better movies, and an ending that completely fell apart. It could and should have been an easy win, but instead it turned into a cheap and embarrassing failure.
Kind of sounds like it was just a rip-off of maybe a remake of Aliens once again, where this new actress is just a Ripley, but less Ripley.
Number 4, Argylle. If ever a movie failed to make use of an impressive cast and a fun premise, it was Argylle. The trailers built it up as a reality-bending action comedy with Henry Cavill playing a suave fictional super spy who might just be more real than he seems. Instead, it turned out to be a tedious and unfunny slog about a fat middle-aged woman who somehow turns out to be the most deadly secret agent in the world. Bryce Dallas Howard looks awkward and uncomfortable, especially when she has to do anything even resembling action. Henry Cavill's barely even in the movie, and even Sam Rockwell can't rescue what turned out to be a complete dud of a film. Now, this last one's probably going to be controversial.
Don't do this to me. I can't watch the last one, I'm sorry. Never heard of that movie before, but just from the few scenes, I can't believe it did so poorly with all of those really familiar actors and faces of people. Even that familiarity and legends of actors can't save bad writing, bad directing, and just a bad story all around. That's not believable.
Very good, and it was a
I
big
can't watch
downgrade
it.
from season.
I literally can't watch it. Sorry. It's the whole thing. It's the rest. Oh my gosh.
Enjoyed season 1.
No,
There
no, I
you
can't
have
watch
it,
it.
dear viewer. My little attempt to sum up the best and worst of what's been a pretty rough year in entertainment. I don't know what 2025 is going to bring us, but one thing I can promise you is that I'll be there trying to make sense of it. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
I try to go off of what's recommended to me, and a few people have requested this video, but I do want to apologize that not only did I watch only half, which is the worst, which is just the negative part of the video, but I also skipped a tiny part at the end and maybe over talked about things that I haven't even seen myself. And I want to be careful about not just reiterating what he's saying, because then what's the point of watching it? But I do find these videos interesting, not only because I think that he speaks really well and he points out really great things about these movies that he might even already go into knowing that they're going to be bad, but does give them a chance, considering he has good opinions about some things that he actually expected to be terrible. So doesn't just diss movies for the sake of it, really lays out reasons why he thinks that it failed, whether it's directing, the story, the changing of the characters, whatever it is. He lays out his reasons very well, so I find the videos interesting. If you haven't already, make sure you go and check out Critical Drinker's video or channel, because that's where I got the video from. And like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and check out my Twitch and my Patreon. I'll see you all next time.